Hi, my name is Dave Reski, founder and president of NowSpeed, and welcome to this edition of In the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths and misunderstandings of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Michael Bloch. He's a CEO coach and CEO of Building Bloch, his business. And I'm excited to have Michael on the show because I've known him for many years. We traveled together, enjoyed some crazy times together, and I've always been impressed, Michael, with your deep understanding of business and strategy and willingness to ask the hard questions. So thank you for being on the show.
It's great to be with you, Dave. And I do, you're helping me recall some of those fun times we had on some of our trips and adventures. So thanks.
Yeah. So thanks again for being here. So as you know, I like to start these conversations with what I call a mythbuster question. And the question I'd like to explore with you is the one we talked about, which is that the best businesses run in harmony without conflict. True or not true?
Not true. Not true at all. And I think the fear of conflict and the avoidance of conflict is a roadblock for leadership teams. And when you think about it, it's not the conflict itself that's the issue. It's how we manage conflict. So we can either manage it in a healthy way that leads to breakthrough moments, innovation, creativity, or we get hung up on the politics, the silos, the turf protection, which can then result in kind of toxicity, maybe moving away from a collaborative, authentic relationship to a little bit of a transactional one. So it's really not the conflict. Conflict is great. It's where we challenge the status quo, where we push each other to question what we believe as a team, what we believe about our company, our culture, our industry, our future, which is always good. But you have to have that sort of underlying trust and safety foundation to be able to have healthy conflict.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in that. So let me just kind of unpack a couple pieces that you said there one at a time. So let's talk about that trust and safety piece first. So organizations need to have conflict in order to deal with hard questions. We'll talk about that. But what is that trust and safety that you have to have in order to have that conflict? How does that kind of work?
So, to me, that's the foundational element of it. And one of my favorite authors is Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book called The Four Obsessions of the Extraordinary Executive. And he talks that great teams have to be healthy and smart. And I think too many leaders just kind of throw out a lot of smart. Let's set goals. Let's have KPIs. Let's set quarterly rocks or objectives. And it doesn't feel like that's a collaborative effort. So there's not the underlying team health of, can we have open and honest conversations? Can we question? Can we, hold each other accountable? Can we give each other feedback, positive or, I don't like the word critical, but opportunity for growth. And if that underlying, it's kind of like, I spend a lot of time on Cape Cod, and there's some rough storms come through this area once in a while. You can build a great house, but if it's not built on a really rock solid foundation, first storm comes and you get a lot of damage. Same thing with a company. If you don't have that underlying trust, first storm comes and people are kind of running for the hills, avoiding, putting up roadblocks, not being open and honest. And I always kind of say, a really great team, there should be no disconnect between what I'm thinking here and what's kind of coming out of my mouth and in the team. But there's a skill set to that, because I always say, anybody should feel in a team that has really good trust, and even a higher level, that psychological safety that's become kind of a phrase that's been adopted by a lot of businesses. We can speak our truth. It's just, I kind of use this metaphor. Are we delivering that truth with the precision of a scalpel, or are we delivering it with the precision of a broken beer bottle? One makes a nice clean cut, heals cleanly, very little damage. The other one, jagged, scarring, damage. So it's really just learning how to have those open, honest conversations.
Yeah, well, that can make a huge difference. So it's funny, in my world in marketing, it's almost a cliche that like a chief marketing officer will come in and they've got a tenure of 18 months to 2 years, and they come in with a sledgehammer and they're raking havoc. They make all kinds of change, and then they move on, and they kind of treat some of their employees or their agencies. They're not always setting the psychological safety in place. They're kind of, it's often a tough environment, right? American businesses can be tough. So, and one of our core values at NowSpeed is trust and respect. And how do you kind of create that environment of trust and respect when, in the reality of American business, people do get fired and people quit and people move on? And that is it trust and respect in the moment, or is it a trust and respect or trust and safety? We're gonna work together for the next year or two, I guarantee. Well, unless you're not good enough to perform what I want you to do, how do you create that trust and safety when things are pretty dynamic in a business?
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything about trust and safety that says, listen, we're somehow prohibited from making tough choices. And certainly people choices are always a tough choice. We want to steal from Jim Collins, we want the right people in the right seats on this bus, and that's how we're going to move forward. And if you're not a right person, if you're not a good fit for our culture, or you're not in the right seat, you're not in a role in our company that you can succeed in, and the company can succeed in, changes have to be made. So I don't think there's anything about trust and safety that limits our ability to hold each other accountable. But I mean, I often ask leaders I coach, how often do you ask your team or people who report to you, is there anything I'm doing that's getting in the way of you doing your best work? How can I better support you? Are there any confusing messages coming from me that leave you unclear about priorities, decision rights, what success in your seat looks like? That's all that is me saying, I want feedback. The way I grow as a leader is to get feedback. And while we expect feedback coming down from above, because that's part of your annual review or whatever the process may be, we often have to be more intentional about soliciting feedback from the people who report to us. And to me, trust building are little steps that help build trust. And to me, trust diminishing are little steps that chip away at trust. I'm not talking about the kind of trust destroying behaviors like I breached a confidentiality agreement I had with somebody, or I threw somebody under the bus, and that kind of trust. But little things like, hey, if I say we're going to start a meeting at 10 and I walk in at 10:05, I'm diminishing trust a little bit. I'm not keeping my word. I'm not reliable. And we may not think of it, but it's a bank deposit. What are the things we do to make deposits? And every once in a while we're gonna mess up or need to switch something, and we're gonna rely on a few withdrawals, but we want to keep a positive balance there. So I think that's the basic trust, is that we're credible, we're reliable, we're adaptable, we're vulnerable, and to me that's a huge core leadership skill these days, and that we have the greater good in mind, and we're not letting self-interest get in the way of what's best for the organization or for the team. And when those things there, you have solid trust. Psychological safety to me is like trust on steroids. Now we say, do we create a safe container where everybody in the room feels empowered to share their thoughts, share their ideas without fear of shame, isolation, those kinds of things that make us sort of say, well, that didn't feel good, I'm not going to try that again with this team.
Yeah. So trust and safety is critical, and that psychological safety is critical. It's not a job guarantee. People still have to be accountable, and they have to do what they say they're going to do. But you got to create the environment, especially as a leader. Let's talk about the why of conflict. So why not just have an organization where everybody is like on the same page, everything's going, we don't have to have any hard conversations? Why is that not possible?
Well, it's certainly possible, and it certainly exists. I just think there's a cost associated with it, and it can be a huge cost. And when working with my clients and using the last 3 or 4 years as an unusual test case between the pandemic and labor shortages and supply chain interruptions and all those kinds of things, we need new ideas. We needed new thinking. We needed to get away of this is the way our organization's always done it, because all the rules are out the door. Companies that expected people to show up in their office at 9 and stay till 5, that was gone, and there had to be all new ideas and all new ways of thinking. And it's the ability to push those ideas into the room or deliver those ideas into the room. Not that they're going to get accepted or adapted, but that we can have, I'm sorry, my camera seems to go out of focus there for a second. Sorry about that. We can have some healthy debate, healthy conflict. And I think what a great team expects and should hear from everybody in the room is, we had a great debate. We came to a decision. It's okay for me to say, I disagree with that decision, but I fully commit. I'm all in. This is the way we're going forward. So we can be on the same page. We just don't feel like we're getting, roped into that page. We feel like we're helping create that direction in that page, and our voices were heard. And that's really what trust and safety is. I have a voice. It was considered. I'm not going to win everything, but I felt heard.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've got to have those times of conflict, because the business is changing, hard decisions have to be made, the business environment is changing, or the economy is changing. COVID, as you mentioned, is a huge example of that. So you go into those situations and you have these hard conversations, you establish that psychological safety. In your experience, how often is that kind of conflict necessary? Should a leader kind of provoke those kinds of conversations all the time? Should that be part of their job? Or should they kind of say, hey, we're going to have this great debate once a year, and then we're going to execute our plan. I'll hold you accountable. We'll talk about this. But is this kind of something that leaders should be aiming for, regular conflict? Is it weekly, monthly? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think leaders, first of all, I don't think conflict says we're not executing on our plan, but we should at least be aware that stuff's going to come up along the way that's going to get in the way of executing on our plan. And doesn't have to be big, world changing tsunami stuff like a pandemic, but it can just be, an employee quitting, or a customer changing its focus, or whatever might come up that's going to get in the way. And we got to have that open debate. I think great leaders provoke a little open debate, a little conflict. I mean, if a leader comes into their team and says, you know what, if we were 20% bolder, what would we start doing today? Man, that'll just open up a little bit of a floodgate. So long as everybody in the room already sort of has that relationship and that safety and trust, that they feel that they can participate in that conversation, I think stuff like that is great. I use a process often with teams. We call it Upside. It was developed by a couple of friends of mine, where we actually try to develop these breakthrough questions. How can we scale without losing the familial culture we've created? And they sort of go deep into it, and they actually say, well, what's our current situation? What do we want as a desired outcome? What are our resources, our experience, places we can turn to bridge that gap? And we actually do this almost as a visual representation with cards on the table, naming all these things and rearranging these things, like remote work and things that might be getting in the way, and trying to reframe it into a way that can get us a desired outcome. And it takes conflict. It takes a view. It takes a team taking a hard look, really, at like, where are we? Let's be open and honest just about where we are. One of my favorite books is Atomic Habits, and he mentions in that book, we generally don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of the systems that we've created. And if we're not willing to take a hard look at the systemic level, and trust being one of them, maybe we don't have a trusting environment, maybe we don't have a supportive environment, maybe we have metrics or KPIs where two departments are in conflict with each other, and they can't reconcile that. Things like that are just really great when a team can dive in, and it's going to create conflict. It's going to create a little bit of fear as teams look at things like, do we have the right structure? Well, now, do I have to worry that my role might be in a little trouble? Do I fit in this new structure the way I fit in the old structure? those are hard conversations to have, but I think necessary for teams to for organizations to thrive and survive and change and grow.
Yeah. So you've got to ask those hard questions. And I guess maybe the pace of that depends on where you're at in the business and what the business is going through and how it's performing, right? So, but asking those hard questions. So you're in a role where you can, as a coach or as a facilitator, you can come in and ask those hard questions, maybe of groups, and facilitate that. In your experience, is it easier or better to have a coach or a facilitator come in and ask those hard questions and kind of work a team through that? Or is it better to have the CEO or the executives be the people that are kind of driving that kind of those kind of conflict questions? Or is it both?
So I think in my role as a facilitator and coach, it's not even for me to ask the questions, it's for me to create the environment where the questions can be asked. I'm really clear that I'm not an expert in nearly any industry my clients are in. I have clients that are across a broad range of really interesting industry, from retail to architecture to construction to manufacturing. And I love that diversity. But I do set up that the expertise is in the room. We just have to draw it out. Either we have the answers within the room here in this team, or as a team we know where to go and get the technical expertise that we need. But what are we afraid to ask? And that's really what I try to do, is I try to let teams have the conversations that they need to have with each other, and I try to manage it and try to facilitate it in a way that becomes a tool for them so they can do this without me. My job is not to embed myself in any of my clients. My job is to help them create what their, the culture, the vision, the strategy they want, with open, honest conversations, face the hard questions, potentially make some commitments to some tough changes, and then give them that tool to continually do that on their own, so that they don't need someone like me in the long, for a long haul.
Yeah, and that's really powerful. You must see some executives or CEOs that are really good at that, and others that kind of need help and are developing. And one of the things that I sometimes think about is how that sometimes plays out geographically. So, I was born in Winnipeg, Canada, and I moved to Cleveland when I was 4 months old. So, but I still have like these Canadian roots, maybe. And people say, "Oh, Dave, you're so nice. You're such a nice guy." And so, and maybe Canadians have that reputation of being nice, where maybe New Yorkers have a little bit more of a brash approach to life and to relationships and things. Do you find that the ability to kind of have these hard conversations varies by geography, or is it just maybe by person, or is it more something that really can be trained, and anyone can ask the tough questions, enter into healthy conflict, and make that happen?
So I think I've never thought of it as geographical, although I do have 2 Canadian clients, and yeah, you guys are just nicer. I'll give that. And I grew up in New York, so maybe I'm one of those, New York types. But I think, well, here's how I look at it. Let's say there's a leadership team of 7 people, and I'll just pick a number. The average age of that team is 40. Every time that team converges, there's 280 years of life experiences, values built, stories we've been attached to, a belief system we have, biases we have. It's all kind of converging in the room. So I think part of it is understanding each other as human beings. So a big part of what I do usually at the onset of an engagement is, let's just get to know each other a little bit. Some of us have been working side by side for years, and we actually don't know much about each other, our upbringing, our highs and lows of our life experiences. I find that teams love that. I mean, I have seen a bunch of people in the construction industry with, tears rolling as they learn about each other. And a lot of that helps us to hold our judgments about some other people lightly. We let them go. I worked with a team recently where there was clear fear about burnout going on, and a CEO who just works ridiculously long hours. And he just shared a story about his upbringing, saying, he shared when I was in, I forget, it was fourth or fifth grade, I was left back for a year. And the message I got is I have some learning difficulties and I just have to work harder than everybody else. That's how I succeed. And it was such an aha for the team because they just saw him as a bit of a taskmaster and expected everybody to work as hard as he did. And when they try to keep up with him, they can never keep up with him. And then they sort of reached, like exhaustion level. And it was such an aha moment for that team of respect towards him, vulnerability by him, and everybody just kind of understood it better. And they sort of came to a way that they think that they can communicate with each other when the CEO may be back in that persona of I got to work harder, I got to work harder, I got to work harder. And when the team might be feeling a little bit of kind of too much pressure.
Yeah.
Such
So
a nice moment.
wow, that's really powerful. So I guess the lesson there is that, when you have healthy conflict works better when you have real human relationships, you know each other, you hold some of those judgments, you're more understanding, but you can still kind of work through those conflicts and still be open and honest with each other. So it sounds like you got to create those conditions, and that's maybe not a one-time thing, that's probably an ongoing thing that happens.
Yeah, so in teams I work with on an ongoing basis, we'll do an offsite. I tend to work on a quarterly cadence with them, where the quarterly meetings tend to be more strategic and setting the priorities for the next quarter. But at least once a year, we'll do a team offsite, and it just has to be some health diagnostics, team building. Chances are, in any given year, one or two people on a team may change, so there's new people, and we want to have them feel fully integrated. So I think it's important for teams to do that at least once a year. And it doesn't have to be this heavy emotional kind of stuff, whether they go bowling with each other, whether they cook a meal with each other, whether they ride bikes together. It's just relationship building. And anytime we can have a more human relationship, trust is there, the ability to have an open conversation is there, the ability to support each other is there. And what happens in those moments, particularly like some of those personal sharing moments, is we find connections that we never knew we had. Oh, you lost your father at a young age, so did I. I never knew we had that in common. You had addiction was an issue in your family growing up. I had the same thing with a sibling of mine. We can have different kind of conversations with each other as people, rather than the VP of this talking to the VP of that around some business strategic need or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. We just are coming off of our annual team offsite where we brought the whole company into Boston, and we had a bunch of events and dinners, and we went to a darts place, Flight Club, and through darts.
That's a lot of fun. I've been there. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and all the side conversations about people's lives and all that stuff. I can really appreciate what you're saying about building trust and those deep relationships. So when you have those areas at times of conflict or those issues that come up, you can kind of see the people as real people and understand more about what's going on with them. So we talked about this idea of like psychological safety and good conflict and understanding people, and that's how to do it well. What's the bad conflict? You must have, in your experience, you've been with a lot of companies, and so how do you do it wrong, as a cautionary tale for us to look for things to avoid? What's the wrong way to have conflict?
So the most common wrong way to have conflict is to take a judgment, an opinion, and a story and present it as truth, right? You don't respect me, or you're not aligned with what we're trying to do here. And there's a lot of youing, going on, where I'm making a judgment about you, or you did this to me. And that tends to immediately have the receiving person kind of say, all right, they're coming at me with a bazooka. I need to load my bazooka, and now we're ready for battle. Versus, here's just some facts about what happened, really unrefutable facts. At the meeting yesterday, you stated that you couldn't get this project completed because you were waiting for something from me. That's a fact. That if that happened at the meeting, there should be no disagreement around that. After that, it's, let me tell you how that lays on me. I feel like I was thrown under the bus. It kind of hurts. My wish is that you would have come to me and let me know that you were waiting for this, or I didn't realize the due date was due. We can have some conversation. But I got to own my part in it. I mean, I think one of the best things around conflict, and a concept I teach, is we have this old model of a pie, and we say, all right, Dave, what's going on between us? It's 70% your fault, 30% my fault. And we divvy up the pie that way. And I like to say, you know what, if we have conflict with each other, there's two pies. You are 100% responsible for everything you're doing to create or sustain this conflict. And I'll take 100% responsibility for everything I've done or am doing that are creating or sustaining this conflict. Let's own it, and then let's collaborate on trying to resolve it. If I shift, if I take care of my 100%, whether I know I can't control whether you will or not, but the whole situation tends to shift. So if we own our part, if we separate facts from judgments, if we're open to being a little vulnerable and saying, you know, that hurt, I felt disrespected, and allow the emotions to come in. And then the one thing that's usually left out of any disagreement, I don't care whether you're talking to a teammate or you're talking to your spouse or your kids or anybody in your life, what do you want? Like, what's a resolution even look like? Like, let's lay it on the table. Here's what I want. I want us to be able to schedule a weekly 15-minute meeting to make sure we're on the same page every Monday before we head into the work week. You know, what I want is my annual review to get done. I feel like, you know, I'm kind of going rudderless here. So you just ask for what you want. I tell any client I coach, you should always feel empowered to ask for what you want, but you should always have a little Mick Jagger playing in your head. You can't always get what you want, but if you ask, you may get what you need. So you might not get your exact want, but there's usually somewhere in the middle that will be a win-win for both people.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like such a healthy process of going through that. And I can think of times where I am not that interested in going through that process. I'm just kind of interested in hanging on to my own judgments and my own feelings and saying, or not, you know, that, and then, you know, not bringing that up and just kind of hanging on and resenting and, you know, feeling worse about that person and not willing to bring it up. Yeah. So how do you kind of break through with that and kind of go from a mode? I guess there's two bad modes in that, what I've described that I've experienced. One is that I'm not willing to have those hard conversations, and I just want to breed my own resentment and my own feelings and not do that. So, you know, how do you kind of move from that to having those, you know, conversations?
Yeah. So I think, you know, in one respect, that's sort of what keeps me employed. I mean, sometimes you need some facilitation to learn the process and practice the process of giving feedback, of clearing issues. You know, I sometimes say the reason we clear issues, the reason why it's important, is we clear because we care. If I don't want to have an authentic, deeper relationship with you, I'll let something fester. I don't care. You know, if the barista at Starbucks screws up my order, I'm not going to try to have an issue clearing conversation with them. I'm not trying to build an authentic relationship. It's a transactional relationship. But with people at work, if we can get in the mindset that I care about you, I want a deeper relationship with you, I trust you, and I want to remove this thing that's going on between us, it sort of opens up a new mindset of why it's such a positive thing to do this. And it, you know, I sometimes use the analogy of a splinter. If you get a splinter in your finger, you know, and that's sort of an issue that's going on between you and another person, most of us will take a needle, we'll poke that thing out. It'll be a second of pain and a drop of blood. And that's what a difficult conversation should be like. It heals really quickly. If you leave that splinter in there and ignore it because you're scared of conflict, it's not the culture of the organization, you know, all kinds of fear comes up for you, eventually your finger is going to get infected. You ignore that, your whole arm is going to turn gangrene. You ignore that, amputation, which is the, you know, equivalent of somebody's going to get fired, is gonna happen. And that could have all often been resolved very quickly without the resentment and the gossip and the toxicity and the drama and all the stuff that might take place because we're not dealing with it. It also, the longer you wait to kind of have a difficult conversation, the more fuzzy the facts get. If I can have a difficult conversation about something that happened yesterday, I'm pretty clear on the facts and I can probably articulate. If I'm finally going to have a conversation with you about something that happened last September, facts get fuzzy, and I'm a little less clear on what went on that's giving me this feeling or this judgment.
Wow, Michael, so many great thoughts here. I feel like I've learned so much about leadership and even personal relationships, and there's so much here. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share this. It's been a powerful conversation. I think this could really help me and really help a lot of people. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Dave. Great seeing you again.
Yeah. So if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about, the kind of work that you do for CEOs and companies, how would they do that?
Yeah, so buildingbloch.com or my address, and Bloch, it's a play on my last name. My last name is spelled Bloch, so it's Building Bloch with an H at the end, or mbloch@buildingbloch.com. I'd love to connect with people.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time. Have a great day.